Okay, hi everyone. I thought I would try to make another video talking about grammars of Turkic in other languages, in particular Persian and Arabic, based on two books I recently got. One is from the library. One is when I was able to get my own copy of Sunlux, which is quite nice because it has a facsimile, although not a very easy to read one, of the Persian manuscript. Sunlux is from the 18th century. This is a Persian, as the title implies, a Persian guide to the Turkish language from Iran, and it was edited by a very great Turkologist, Gerard Clausen. And then I also found this book in the library recently. This is Arabic Grammars of Turkic by Robert Ermers. And I wanted to talk about these because it's related to my long-term project, by which I mean this will probably take me many years to create a Chagatai lexicon. And why are these materials important? That's kind of what I wanted to discuss. One thing when creating, I think, a lexicon for these sorts of languages is, it's one thing for me to look at different texts in Chagatai, whether it's like something from Alishir Navai or from the Baburname, and I'll talk about the Baburname in a minute because that might get tricky, but when reading those texts to try and look at the meaning and usage of words, I'm relying on I would be relying on my own knowledge and kind of intuition of how to, translate that into English. Obviously, translation is not, perfectly scientific, but I think these texts are important because these are generally, the ones Ermers studies in his book, and then then Sunlux itself, these are the works that grammarians within the Islamic world created to read, to understand Turkic. So these are not, the works of, kind of Orientalists. And I should clarify, if you're new here, I don't use Orientalist as a pejorative. I just mean that as, kind of Western scholars working on, Islamic world materials. These were the earlier works that followed, kind of the intellectual understanding of the Islamic world through various centuries. And these kind of meta works are very important because these scholars would have understood the usage of the language in their time better than, I or really anyone else could sort of infer just from reading a text, a source text, and then trying to figure out how to translate the usage and meaning of the words. Now, might be getting into the weeds, but I think that's sort of important. And another thing I found with examining this subject, and I'm really only beginning this studying this, but there's only so many of these texts out there, at least that I can find on manuscript catalogs and that sort of thing. And none of them are, I shouldn't say none, but most of them are not comprehensive. So a lot of them will be a word list, kind of like the Rasulid hexaglot, where it kind of is called the King's Dictionary, but if you look at the kind of its extent, it's not all that comprehensive, really. And I think it's the same for like the Sunlux, and probably some of the works that Ermers covers in his study. So it's not necessarily as comprehensive as we would like. I mean, that's normal in any kind of study. Your sources don't necessarily give you the answers you want. this I think is still a really important subject for more study, is because, until you get the Ottomans, the Turkic languages are not widely written in the Islamic world. They are written, it's not to say it never happened, but just not very widely. I think there are some, like when you get to the Mamluk periods, this would be like from the late 13th century until the beginning of the 16th century. I think you do have written Turkic materials there. Obviously the Ottomans write in Ottoman Turkish, but that's also quite different. The Ottoman becomes quite different than the kind of Chagatai that I'm more interested in for creating a lexicon for, because for Ottoman, James Redhouse did that in the 19th century. That's still pretty much the gold standard Ottoman lexicon into English. So these kinds of works are pretty important, like I said, for understanding how the grammarians and lexicographers within the Islamic world understood Turkic languages, how they presented them. But one challenge, and I've noticed this reading Irmer's study, is a lot of the Arab grammarians tended to try to understand Turkic in Arabic terms, which makes sense, but it's also frustrating. Like, for example, it will, one of the chapter I was just reading, talking about like one of the Arab scholars assigned like a root system to Turkic, like in the way Arabic has every word has a trilateral root, and I think this one Arab, if I'm remembering the chapter right, assigned something like a quadrilateral root or something. It's Turkic doesn't really function like that. So that's another layer to this that's kind of needs to be sussed out, I guess. Now another type of text that I discovered, I think it was in the British Library catalog, is there are some of these lexicons, Persian to Chagatai lexicons, at least one that's from South Asia. It's from Mughal India, I believe from the late 17th century. So that's quite interesting, because that tells me that there was at least interest in Turkic in Mughal India long past Babur's time, because the Babur, is a Turkic speaker. I'm sure Humayun was as well, but the court and the culture becomes pretty much Persian speaking for the most part, almost entirely, I think, by the time you get to the late 16th, and certainly by the 17th century, I think they would be totally Persianate. But if there are these linguistic texts from the 17th century, that does tell me, I think, that there would have been still some people trying to read Turkic, and perhaps older manuscripts, Chagatai manuscripts in Mughal India that maybe no longer exist. Hard to say, but that is interesting. I found this one manuscript. I did try to get a copy of it. Unfortunately, it was not available. But that's another kind of wrinkle on this, is stuff from Mughal India that is still a kind of that is a Persian text about Chagatai or about Turkic, because Sanlax is from Iran. It's from the early 18th century, and Iran, the Safavid Iran had a long-standing confrontation with the Uzbeks, although the Uzbek Khanate in Bukhara used Persian pretty much for administration and literature. But there were Turkic peoples within Iran, Greater Iran, and of course the Safavid Kizilbash elite were, spoke Azeri, Turkish, or at least it's the ancestor of modern Azeri Turkish. So there's that kind of interaction. The grammarians profiled in Ermers are much more like Mamluk period, and a lot of the manuscripts, based on just taking a look at what he profiles, were seem to have been Mamluk works on probably Kipchak Turkish that were then taken into the Ottoman, once the Mamluk Sultanate's conquered by the Ottoman Empire. A lot of those manuscripts end up in Constantinople, Istanbul, over time. So these seem to be more, well, with the exception of Kashgari, who's like in the 11th century. I mean, most of those stuff Ermer's studies is from later periods, from looking kind of Kipchak. But I still think that's valuable to look at that, because I think for understanding Chagatai, getting as much kind of early, pre-modern documentation on Turkish in all of its varieties is essential for trying to understand Chagatai, and trying to, classify it and then come up with like a lexicon. And I did mention talking about the Baburname, because I would like to use eventually, if I could find a Chagatai manuscript of the Baburname, a scan of it somewhere. The Baburname is a little tricky because the manuscripts, I don't know if there is one that's been digitized. It's the Chagatai, but that is kind of the challenge. And the Baburname is important for like kind of linguistic documentation, because Babur was not super well educated, and not a slam on him, but he was not like an ulama or something with a very kind of high education. He was literate, of course, but had probably a relatively kind of basic education. But I think his language is probably closer to sort of more vernacular modes of speech, whereas the kind of stuff that might be recorded in Sangwaks or the Arabic grammars might be more kind of literary. And certainly the Abushka Lugat, which I've talked about on previously on the channel, which is mostly so this is a early Chagatai lexicon into Ottoman Turkish from the 16th century. That's obviously drawing from it's drawing on the poetry of Alishir Navai. So this is again like higher literary register, and Babur is kind of more of a, I don't want to say low, but a more middle register. That's I think that's all I have to say on this subject. I know this was kind of a rambling, perhaps a not very clear presentation, but I just wanted to discuss this. I think this is, even within scholarship, I don't think this has been fully kind of examined, although obviously we have, a couple books here. I think, well, maybe this is something to discuss. I think the problem is, people don't tend to look for this stuff because, there's the very popular concept in scholarship, both history and I think kind of, literature studies about, the Persianate sphere, and, everyone uses Persian, although that's not, I don't want to straw man them too much, but, that Persian is like dominant. And so I think an unintended consequence of the Persianate concept, kind of makes people put on blinders that, there probably is material on Turkic in like Central Asia, for example, or perhaps even in Mughal India, but, the Persianate idea has become so strong, people might not really try to look for it. I think there's more to be done in this area. I will have to also probably look more at what scholars in Turkey have been working on. I'm sure they've discussed this issue in some depth, but yeah, that's the video. Again, I hope this wasn't too, this may have been a little too technical and a little too dry, but I just wanted to discuss this and try to get some thoughts out, and maybe you found it interesting. And thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next video.